And that is my song entitled 19nesia by Dizzy Gillespie. I'm Marcus Hicks, and that was my performance. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. This is called Education That Saves. To the untrained eye, many of our youth appear too cool for school. But how can they focus when teens get slaughtered, when there's lead in the water, when single daughters raise sons without father figures to be seen, when our politics are obscene? Why learn an American history that doesn't tell the story of them? Why solve math equations that don't explain their neighborhood devastation? We gave them romance languages when their native tongues have been vanquished, asking them to prove philosophical truths that can't fathom the square root of their suffering. And we be cutting art and music as if we don't use it to find beauty in ashes. I am an educator, the root word which means to lead out or draw forth, and thus help youth plot course with the giftings that reside inside of them. I am mere instrument, shape-shifter, teacher, mentor, leader, reservoir of love, and whatever my students are in need of. I am a general on the front lines, my battlefield littered with chalk lines, black gifted and beautiful sons and daughters I've seen intellectual slaughter, potential wasted and or unfulfilled killed. I've seen black self-worth compelled to assert that it matters. Our children have been battered beyond reason, in season, out of season. And I, along with every other teacher in this great land, lock arms and stand. Barely enough ammunition to remedy this condition. This is the thorn core source of my affliction. How to save our sons and daughters is the teacher's mission. They don't care how much you know unless you first care about their condition. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus Hicks and Jonathan White, for helping us set the tone today for this evening. Welcome to Give Back, Give Black, a fireside chat with author Betty Kilby Fisher Baldwin. I'm Greg Spencer, the chairman of the POISE Board of Directors. It is my honor to kick off our year-long anniversary activities. For 40 years, the POISE Foundation has given back to Black communities, helping to achieve self-sustaining practices through strategic leadership, collective giving, grant making, and advocacy. This year, we are marking our 40 years of philanthropy. We invite you to join our celebration. From now until the end of the year, we will host a series of online events to celebrate Black excellence. We'll feature the Foundation's accomplishments, grantees, and supporters, such as those tuning in this evening. We can't do it without you. You helped POISE Foundation grow from an initial investment of $164,000 to a present day value of more than $11 million. Over the years, POISE poured into the community, distributing $15.5 million in grants and scholarships to deserving organizations and families across Allegheny County, the Commonwealth, and the country. In the midst of a pandemic, POISE positioned itself to thrive. We launched the Critical Community Needs Fund, which supports small to mid-sized Black-led organizations that serve and sustain our community during a double crisis, COVID-19 and anti-Black violence. Thus far, we raised more than $1.3 million for the fund and awarded more than $1 million to 100 local organizations. As the pandemic continues to unfold, new concerns continue to surface in our community. Although COVID-19 doesn't discriminate, it does hit Black communities much harder with a disproportionate number of diagnoses and deaths. One individual or even one organization cannot solve the problems the pandemic is creating. However, we can pool our resources to meet our community's needs. I invite you to consider supporting the POISE Foundation this evening. You can make an online donation by visiting poise.org/donate. The first 50 donors who make an unrestricted general operating contribution will receive a free autographed copy of Dr. Baldwin's book. Just put Betty Baldwin in the memo line when you make the donation. Thank you in advance for your consideration. At this time, I'd like to introduce Mark Lewis, POISE Foundation President and CEO. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Again, my name is Mark Lewis, and I have had the pleasure of serving POISE Foundation in many roles, including consultant, board member, and for the last 19 years as its president and CEO. In many ways, POISE Foundation was an experiment. It was the second Black public foundation created in the United States, and the first and only in Pennsylvania. There were many people in the early 80s that challenged the very need of the foundation's existence. A white gentleman wrote a letter to our founder, Bernard Jones, that said, "Why did you all create this foundation? We have always taken care of you Black people, and we know how to do it better than you." He was also told many times that Black people have no understanding of how money worked. Regardless of the obstacles and barriers, Bernie Jones believed in self-sufficiency and growing assets in, for, and by the Black community. He was willing to sacrifice his own personal gain to ensure the foundation would grow. So in 1980, the foundation began with 3 funds valued at $164,000. And as Greg mentioned, we now manage over 200 funds valued at over $11 million. In 1982, we made our first 5 grants totaling $17,000. In 2020 alone, we have made grants totaling over $2 million. We have expanded our grant making, we have expanded our services to our community, and we can continue to educate our community on the power and benefit of collective giving and collective action. Education remains a large part of our foundation, with over 80 funds focused on scholarships or some form of education. And after 40 years of service, we are only beginning. I want to thank our past and present board members for grabbing hold to the vision of Bernie Jones and stewarding the foundation through these 40 years. But we also need the continuing support of our community, and we definitely need the continuing support of our donors to ensure the POISE Foundation does not just exist for another 40 years, but it becomes an institution with no end. So we ask that you support and please donate to POISE to support our efforts and join our quest for a Black community that takes care of itself. And at this time, I would like to pass the program over to Karis Jackson, our Chief Operating Officer.
Thank you, Mark. Good evening, everyone. I've been looking forward to hosting this conversation with Dr. Betty Kilby Fisher Baldwin for quite some time. Having had the opportunity to travel to Warren County, Virginia, and stand in front of the school that Betty helped integrate, and visit the church where her father and others strategized about how to best dismantle school segregation in their community, and having read her book, Wit, Will, and Walls, and those of her father and her siblings, I've come to appreciate and admire Betty and her family's legacy. Dr. Baldwin was the infant plaintiff in a landmark school desegregation case, and author of the book, as I mentioned, Wit, Will, and Walls. Dr. Baldwin was only 9 years old when the Supreme Court handed down its Brown versus Board of Education decision, declaring segregation in schools illegal. 4 years later, in 1958, her father and the NAACP filed a lawsuit against her school district in Warren County, Virginia. And since that time, Dr. Baldwin was named in the case, and her name became synonymous with the civil rights movement. Dr. Baldwin researched Warren County's history from 1836 to 1986, and her writings, Freedom Road, were published in booklet form in a local paper and in the Shenandoah Valley Historical Review. Her story is told in several documentaries nationally and internationally. Dr. Baldwin earned a bachelor's degree in business administration from Shenandoah University, an MBA from Nova University, and an honorary doctor of human letters from Shenandoah University. She is a historical and motivational speaker who facilitates workshops and dialogues on racial reconciliation. Welcome, Dr. Baldwin. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's so good to see you, and it's so good to be here with you to have this conversation. I've just been waiting for it, and I'm so excited to have this chat. So I will jump right in.
All right.
All right. And before I get started, we will say if anybody has any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat, in the comment section, and we'll try to get to those towards the end of our conversation here this evening. So I'll just jump right in. So many Americans forgot that as late as the 1960s, that most African Americans were educated in underfunded, segregated schools. You were only 9 years old when the Supreme Court handed down the landmark Brown versus Board of Education decision, declaring that segregation was indeed illegal. And then 4 years later, in 1958, your father and the NAACP filed a lawsuit against your school district in Warren County, Virginia. You were actually named in the case. What was that like? What was it like for your name to be synonymous with the civil rights movement?
I was 13 at the time. And so being 13, you got something special that the other kids didn't get, and that was to be named. And so at first it was really great. Then they told me, okay, now they know your name. You're a Kilby. There's only one Kilby in the telephone book. And so they know where we live. They know our number. And when we go to when we go to court and we go to the other places, I want you to stay in the background. So I was thinking that I was getting something special. I was going to be somebody special. But when things began to happen and we realized the seriousness of what was happening and what that meant, it wasn't quite as exciting anymore.
Okay. So did you realize right away what it meant to be the Betty in this case?
No. I think that I was grown and I had children, and my daughter Bettina came home one day from school and she said, we were studying Brown versus the Board of Education in school, and the teacher told me to go home and ask your mama about it. because your mother was involved. And Bettina came home and said, Mama, what did she mean? And I had not even told my kids. And that was the beginning of thinking about that, how important it was. I was in college some 20 years after I'd graduated, and I was taking this Virginia history class. And Dr. Hofstra was my Virginia history teacher. And he said, the first part of this Virginia history class, we're going to talk about the antebellum period and slavery. And on the second half of this class, we're going to talk about that case over in Front Royal where they closed the schools. And all of a sudden, I realized he was talking about me. And I went to Dr. Hofstra and I was thinking maybe I can get out of this class. And I said, I can't do this. And he said, why? I said, because that little girl that you were talking about over in Front Royal, that was me. And he got so excited and he almost kicked over the trash can in his office. And he said, you must, you're a primary source. I didn't even know what a primary source was. And that's when I realized how important this case was. And then Dr. Hofstra initiated me going and doing some talks in other places. I was doing talks with people who had degrees and doctors in history. And here I was just beginning this journey of education.
Wow. Yeah, it must be something to be studying history and to realize you're a piece of that history, and not even to think of yourself in that way. I'm sure that was a pretty awesome experience for you.
Yes.
So just kind of backtracking a little bit, one of the things that you talk about in your book, and kind of that is how you got to the point of being the infant plaintiff in this case, was your father and how important education was to him. And what's really interesting is that your father only obtained a third or fourth grade education. And so maybe you can talk a little bit about why he fought so hard and why it was so important for him to ensure that his kids got a quality education.
My daddy grew up on the Finks's farm. And even though it was not slavery, but he worked and his whole family worked on the farm ever since he was able to remember. And they didn't get paid. At Christmas time, they got some stuff. They got maybe a ham and some other things, but they didn't get paid. When he got to about the third or the fourth grade, he was big enough to do major work on the farm. And so he wasn't allowed to go to school.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was really angry about the fact that he couldn't go to school and he couldn't get an education, and his siblings were going to school. And so when he got to be about 17 years old, he went to old man Dick Finks and he was going to quit. He was going to go. He was going to go and leave the farm. And old man Dick Finks gave him the deed to 24 acres of land. And so he stayed on. He still didn't get, he got a little bit more money, but he still didn't get regular wages. And he started to think that if he had had a better education, he would be able to figure out if what he got at Christmas time would equate to his wages. So he was always self-conscious because whatever he didn't know, he blamed it on not being able to go to school and to learn. So he worked, he bottomed chairs, he took on odd jobs, he still worked on the Finks farm. And at the end of about 7 years, he was no further ahead than he was the day that he got that land with that rundown shack on it. So he looked at his money and looked at what he could do with it, and he said, shucks, it's time for this man to have some fun. So he bought himself a car with that money. And his job became hauling the school teachers around. And he was being a chauffeur outside of the job on the Finks farm. While he was driving around, he met this cute little girl from Virginia, and he fell in love with her. And he saw the progress of her family, and it made him look at where he was in life. So he married that pretty little girl without any plan whatsoever. And after they got married, he took her to the Finks farm. My mother had never worked outside of the home. Her daddy was the local veterinarian, and she was a lady of means. And so he took her over there, and the minute the Finks saw her, they had plans for her, that she was going to work not on their farm, but on somebody else's farm. And all of a sudden, my daddy could see the handwriting on the wall and the error of his ways. And so my mother went back to her family and went back to her house to live. And they had this commuting marriage. It didn't last for long. And he said, okay, I've got to do something. And so he sold his car and he bought a cow and he went to work on another farm. And my mother went to live with him. And so after they moved to Front Royal, and they were in Front Royal, he was doing well. He bought another piece of land, and he bought cows and chickens, and he was doing really well. Old man Dick Finks came back and asked for that 24 acres of land. But he didn't ask for that land himself. He put my grandfather up to ask for that land. And my daddy used to say that my grandfather was rooted with the slave mentality. Mm-hmm. And so he told him that if he didn't give him the land back, he would take him to court. Took him to court, and old man Dick Finks said that he didn't mean to give the land to my father. He meant for my father to hold it in conveyance for his own father, for my grandfather. And in less than 24 hours, an all-white judge and jury took my daddy's land. It devastated my father. Yeah. First, because old man Dick Finks had my father's father to sue him in court. So the case didn't come from Dick Finks. It came from John Henry Kilby, my daddy's father. And my father was just devastated. And so my daddy vowed that if we didn't get an education, this would continue. And so he decided right then and there that we were going to get an education.
Wow. So he really felt like the reason why he kind of lost that land was because he didn't have the education that he needed to be able to stand up for himself and ensure that didn't happen.
He believed, and I don't believe that it was the correct. He believed that if he had had a better education, that he would have been able to fight and get that land.
Yeah.
After that, he wrote letters. We wrote letters to everybody, even the FBI, to try to get his land back. And up until the day that he died, he was still wounded and hurt by the fact that he lost his land, that he didn't have enough education.
Yeah. So your father, who was insisted upon that you and your siblings get access to an equal education, how did he happen upon this idea of, hey, wait a second, Brown versus Board of Education happens and our school district is still segregated. Something about this isn't right. Can you maybe kind of thread that together for us a little bit? How did that kind of come into being?
My two brothers went to Johnson Williams, which was the high school for colored children. And there was a teacher there. His name was Reverend Herman D. Frank. And Reverend Frank was educated, had all kinds of degrees. And so Reverend Frank came to the PTA meeting in Warren County. And he gave a speech. And he talked about little Linda Brown in Topeka, Kansas, and how the separate but equal had been shot down by the Brown decision. And that was all that my father needed. Reverend Frank was like the shepherd that had come with the good news, because then he wanted to have Reverend Frank for dinner. And Reverend Frank had two little boys, and I couldn't hear everything that Reverend Frank and my daddy talked about, because they made me stay in the kitchen and watch the two little boys, so my daddy could pick Reverend Frank's brain and he could learn everything that he needed to know. But my two brothers were there, so I had to bribe them to come back and tell me what they said, what they talked about.
And so that was really the impetus for your dad to see, wow, I can bring this same lawsuit here in Warren County. Like, we can fight this here in Warren County. Was that hard do you think that was hard for him to do? Or was he just he heard that and he was just off to the races?
When Daddy lost his land, he fell on his knees and he prayed to God to help him. And so my daddy, he talked to God all the time. And so he saw the light, and he just believed that God had sent Reverend Frank, because Reverend Frank was a preacher, and to bring those good news to him. And so he talked to the other men we lived in this little neighborhood called Happy Creek, and it was more or less a horseshoe, and it was all Black families. And we went to church there every other Sunday, because we had church in Flint Hill where he was a member. And he talked to them, and he got them together. And they had heard about Oliver Hill in Richmond. And so they drove to Richmond. They didn't even have an appointment with Oliver W. Hill when they went there. And they had the other 4 cases in Front Royal that had been in litigation since 1956, and nothing had happened. So when they went to talk to when they went to talk to Oliver W. Hill, he was gracious enough to hear them. And when they started telling him that, he told them that he wanted me to go to that high school, the only high school in Front Royal, and it was a white high school. And when Oliver Hill started to question him back, Oliver Hill, his light came on, because they had been in litigation with those other cases. And he started thinking, you don't have any other high school. And then he was asking, well, where do your kids go to get a high school education? And he told him. And so then he began to think, okay, if I take on this case, I may have a winnable case. And so he told my daddy, he said, once you start down this road, there will be no turning back. And he said, and that this journey it won't be easy. And my daddy said, hey, nothing in life has been easy for me. So I don't expect for it to be easy. And there they started getting the ball rolling.
Wow. Yeah. So, you talk a lot about this in the book. And so people should definitely make sure that they're one of the 50 donors to make a donation and get a part of this book, because you really talk and break this down in your book about kind of how it happened, right? Because it wasn't just like, there was a case and then all of a sudden you were, marching up to that school, desegregating that school, right? Like a lot of things happened in between that kind of initial filing of the lawsuit and then you actually being able to attend and desegregate that school. And so I know it's a long, long story, but maybe you can kind of just talk to us a little bit about how that process was while you were going to court and just kind of things that you and your family experienced while the case was playing out.
Well, when we were going to court, that my daddy had already said your name is on the petition, and I don't want you. I couldn't testify. My brothers didn't testify in court, but some of the older girls testified in court. During that time period, the governor closed the schools under some laws called the massive resistance laws. And when the governor closed the schools that were the previous cases, since they closed Warren County High School, they had to close all the other cases that preceded this, that had been in litigation for years. And another reason that I was chosen and they were looking for the youngest plaintiff, because a lot of times those cases that was in court for a long time, the child whose name was on the case, they had graduated and finished school. So they tried to argue that point too. And we had our house shot at. The calls were horrifying. Obscene, cross burned in the yard. And we had a calf. They were always killing our farm animals, our cows. And they took a little baby calf. They wrapped wire around all 4 ankles.
Mm-hmm.
And the calf's hooves rot off. And they had to shoot that calf in order to put it out of their misery. So when the schools were closed, the white children, within a very short period of time, they were back in school. For us, there was no school for us. We were out of school from September until December. In December, the Black families had raised enough money to send us to school in Washington, D.C. And we were like fish out of water. Here we were, a bunch of little country kids, never been away from home, never been out of the country. And they called us Hicks from the Sticks. So it was like, I didn't fit in anywhere. Most of us didn't fit in anywhere. My brother was a sharp talker and he was a ladies' man. So he had fun with it.
Yeah. So you're saying that the county actually closed the school system down as opposed to letting you all come in and actually, desegregate the school. They literally closed it down as a way to kind of resist integration. So
when the movement was called massive resistance, and when the judge ordered them to comply with the Brown decision, they were looking for a way to not comply. And so they closed the schools, and that gave them time enough to be able to try to work out something that would allow them to prevent desegregation. But they failed at all attempts because the Supreme Court decision was solid.
Yeah. So you get through that period of, just all of the family turmoil and the ways in which people were, because it's such a small community, right, that you live in. And so everybody knows everybody and everybody knows who that Betty is in this lawsuit. And the torment and just everything that your family had to go through. And on top of that, they closed the school system. You have to go all the way to DC to be educated. And, that's that, like you mentioned, that's not a great experience. And it's just amazing, just all of the different ways that society has tried to prohibit Black people from attaining education. The fact that you would be willing to shut a whole school system down as opposed to educating people is just so disheartening. So fast forward a little bit after that, the school is now opening up to you, and you have to go. And I remember having the awesome privilege of being with you when we were in front of that school, and just kind of walking through that experience and seeing some of the photos of what it was like at first day that you all went into that school. Take us back to that first day of your entrance into a desegregated school. What was that experience like for you?
I'll start with the night before. The night before, I was washing dishes and I was standing at the sink. And what I heard, the loud blast go past the window.
Mm-hmm.
And it was somebody shooting at the house. And, I'm just a little 13-year-old girl. I hear the blast. My daddy hollers, hit the floor, gunfire. So you get down on the floor, you're under the table, and you're petrified. And so when everybody else got up from the table, when everything was all over, I didn't move.
Yeah.
And I woke to my mother slapping my face. And she was screaming and crying because she thought I had been shot. I was just a scared little girl. And so we went to the church because there was a little girl in Little Rock, Arkansas, who had got separated from the group, and she was tormented and traumatized. And so we went to church, and Daddy was telling the people in the church, and it was Reverend Frank's church, and he was telling them about the shots being fired at the house. And at that point, I think that was the first time that I saw my father with any fear in his voice whatsoever. Most of the time, he was talking about God and he was praying, but there was a different tone that he used when he was talking about God, and he was telling them about the shots being fired at the house. And Reverend, after he finished telling them, Reverend Frank could tell that if he didn't stop talking, he was going to show us how afraid he really was. And so Reverend Frank started to pray. And then we got into the praying and the singing. And there's nothing like praying and singing that takes your mind off of everything that's going on around you. And we began to plan for what was going to happen the next day. Now, the American Viscos, where my father and at least 4 or 5 of the other fathers worked, they were diehard segregationists.
Yeah.
And they did everything they could to support private education. And so they would not allow them to get off. So they had to work that day. And so they made their plans. The next morning, my mother called me down to eat, as she called everybody down. And I did not want to do this. I was like Jesus at the rock. I did not want to do this, but I knew that I had to.
Yeah.
And so Mama said, "Come on, I made pancakes for you." They were my favorite. And with every bite of those pancakes, I thought they were going to jump up and slap me in the face. But I made it. And when I went to get in the car to go out, my mother yelled to my brothers, "Y'all take care of y'all sister now. You hear me?" And I could hear the fear in her voice. And we got out of the car at the foot of the hill. And this big fat white woman said, I'm gonna kill all you little niggas. And it scared me so bad. And we walked up the hill, and I began to say, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And the next thing I knew, I was saying, yea, though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And I realized that we had been prepared. We had been prepared for that journey to walk up that hill. And one of the older girls, one of those that could sing, began to sing, we shall overcome. And we walked up that hill, and we were all singing, we shall overcome someday. And we got to that hill, and the principal of the school, he held us in such low esteem that he didn't even speak. And as little children, we were taught to respect our elders, whether they were black, white, blue, or green. And so we spoke. And he looked right at us as if he looked right at me as if I didn't exist, and never said a word. The it was hard for a 13-year-old. And even as a 75-year-old woman, I still feel what I felt on that day.
Yeah. Well, we're so grateful for you and grateful for your story. And every time I hear you talk about it and I think about it, I just think about how many of your generation experienced that, right? So every person that had an integrated school in every county, and just how brave and how courageous you were. And so you've opened up so many doors for others to be able to get an education. And so for that, we're grateful. We appreciate you and appreciate that so much. I just want to say that.
Thank you.
So we have about 5 minutes left. I know time is going by so fast. I'm like, wait a minute, we still have more questions to ask. But we have about 5 minutes left. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how that experience has propelled you in your life and the things that you are doing now, because you've gone on to just do some really great and awesome things, through your education and through working in corporate America. And, you're just a phenomenal woman. And so maybe you can talk a little bit about how that experience, has propelled you in your career and the things that you did after you graduated from that school.
Well, it took me 16 years before I decided and made my own declarations that I would not be denied. And so I went back to school and I got my associate's degree because I needed a milestone along the way. I couldn't, I didn't know whether I had what it took to make the grade in college. So I only took one class per semester. Then I went to a company that had a tuition reimbursement program. And because of that, I started to take in more hours. And before you knew it, I was working in the plant, going to school full time. And I was making waves because I was asking for promotions. I probably applied for about 25 or 30 different jobs. And each time they told me no, just made me fight harder.
Yeah.
And so I started at a level 3 and no education, and went to a level 18, became the highest ranking African American female at that organization in 1986. And I left it with my master's degree.
Wow. So would you say you're a lot like your father in the sense that you weren't willing to take no for an answer, and you were going to fight, to make sure you got, what was yours to get?
There came a point in my life when I wanted to be like him. I wanted to be like him because when I had my children, I could never have done what he did with making that sacrifice to get us educated. And so I just wanted to be like him.
Yeah, and you probably, I never met him, but I imagine that you have the spunk and the spark that he probably had, and you probably got that from him.
Yes.
So as we kind of wind down our conversation, do you have any suggestions for our viewers or people who are watching this in terms of things that they can do to help ensure that Black children are provided with equal opportunities to succeed in school? Any recommendations or suggestions you might have for our listeners or viewers?
Get involved. Do something. Everybody can do something. You may not necessarily have money to give, but you can mentor a child. You can do reading for a child. When I graduated from high school, I couldn't even get into college. So there's always a child out there that wants to go to college. They may not have finances. They may not have the knowledge. I remember one young lady that I was helping when I was at church, and I kept asking her about her future and what she was doing about her future. And she started crying and told me, Miss Betty, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to apply for college. I don't know where to go. And so I was able to take her to the college for her to fill out the application. I took her to get all of the paperwork for her financial aid. And if you don't know what to do, either talk to Karis, and if Karis don't give you the right answer, call me.
All right. Those are some great tips for people who are thinking about how they can, help young people, as you've kind of paved the way for a generation of people as well. So is there anything you want to share with us before we wrap up?
All I want to tell everybody is to get involved. Get involved. You don't have to do anything big. Just do what you can.
Thank you. Thank you. And in closing, I just want to add a little teaser. First, I want to tell people, please don't forget, if you donate, you'll be able to get a signed copy of Miss Betty's book, Wit, Will, and Walls. But also, I want to give you a little teaser because if you think that you think Miss Betty's remarkable now, you should just wait and hear about the rest of her story. She has partnered up and with a cousin, and they have come together and they've been doing some really great work around race and reconciliation. And so our next conversation is going to be with Dr. Betty, as well as her cousin, Phoebe Kilby. And they have a new book that's coming out called Cousins. And you're not going to want to miss that conversation. Having this opportunity to talk about Betty and to hear about your story and to learn about how you integrated the school system. But then there's a part two to that, right? I mean, there's how that experience has impacted your life. And so not only were you brave and courageous in integrating a school system, you've been brave and courageous in talking about race and reconciliation and how you've kind of used your experience to impact our society in just incredible ways. So people want to stay tuned for that upcoming conversation. That's going to be May 13th, and there'll be more information coming out about that. I affectionately call you Miss Betty, but I am so grateful for the opportunity to talk with you. When we were thinking about who should we talk to kick off our 40th anniversary, unanimously, we all thought about you and your courageous story of integrating a school system and paving the way for generations to come. And so we're so grateful for you taking the time to come out and chat with us today. So thank you so much. I'm humbled to be able to talk with you.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for keeping this story alive.
Yes, you're welcome. And at this time, we're going to turn it over to our spoken word artist, Jonathan White. And then we'll have our jazz trumpeter, Marcus Hicks, who will close us out for the evening. So please stay tuned.
And yes, I echo Miss Jackson's words and say thank you to Dr. Fisher Baldwin, just that coming through that history and so lovingly sharing it with us that we wouldn't forget. So I thank you. It was an honor and blessing to hear you. This piece is called Ubuntu, which goes back to the Zulu tradition of interconnectedness between human beings. Like we're all interconnected to each other. So I need y'all to go on this historical journey with me and think about giving. I am because you are. I am because we are. Jay-Z said, I can't help the poor if I'm one of them. Respectfully, I challenge this. I've been blessed by many without wealth or privilege. I am because you are. I am because we are. Did you know on the slave ship Hudibras, an African songstress stood still in a circle, young to old female slaves in circle? She blessed her fellow enslaved with melodious waves. She sang of homelands as they danced in wooden graves. It was hope that she gave. I am because you are. I am because we are. Frederick Douglass, Stella, abolitionist. What does your 4th of July mean to me? He translated the agony of the greater Black community. Similarly, Black Moses, underground queen, risked life and limb to deliver our dreams. Freedom. I am because you are. I am because we are. Sojourner Truth alone in crowds of dubious men, testifying she gave permission. Girlfriend, embrace your birth-given condition. Women are backbone of the community mission. Did I mention poetic praise for Lucy Terry? Before America was born, she snatched words from womb, gave it its first Black poem. I am because you are. I am because we are. Benjamin Banneker gave DC its parameters. His intellect stretched Black diameters. Mary Ellen Pleasant, entrepreneurial, serial philanthropist. She took her riches and built Black businesses. George Washington Carver, naturalist, man of substance, took peanuts and gave us sustenance. I am because you are. I am because we are. Black businessmen. Lynch bodies swung in the wind. Ida Wells gave us the gift of her pen. She wrote for them. Booker T. Washington urged us to use these hands. Brick by brick, carve our legacy in this land. I am because you are. I am because we are. Zora Neale wrote in ways that we could feel. Her eyes watching God, words given so we can heal. And still, there was Mary Bethune. She sold dinners to give young girls a school. Langston Hughes collected our blues. He gave us tools. Poetic, antiseptic, the wealth they left was knowledge of self. I am because you are. I am because we are. Eleanor Fagan, aka Billie Holiday, close to age 25. She sang for Black lives. Strange fruit, blood at the roots. Do you know we beautiful in our natural suits? Josephine Baker, banana fruit, skirt, rhythm chaser, ground shaker, uninhibited, Black girl magic unlimited. She gave us movement, made our community fluid. Garvey, Robeson, Baldwin, community spokesman, eloquent elocutors of our existence. I am because you are. I am because we are. Ella gave jazz its curves, softened the blunt edges of words meant to destroy us. Us still love. Angela Davis afroed up, gave strength to our bones so our heads look up. Martin, Malcolm, and Mega took up for us. Nikki and Sonia wrote to us to set us free. They invested love into the Black psyche. Not likely. Is there a queen higher than Michelle Obama? Amalgamation of First Lady and Black Mama. She took communities of brown girls to white houses. John Lewis, life lived, espouses a yearning for liberty that arouses. Mary J. Blige espouses tears and eyes in the face of demise. She gave us Be Happy, but sadly, we lost Chadwick Boseman, chosen to bring ancestors to big screens. He loved the community. That's what made him king. I am because you are. I am because we are. Bree Newsom, freedom rebel, snatched the Confederate flag from its pedestal. She gave our community good trouble. Alicia Patrice Opal, Glade back. Black Lives Matter is vocals. I am hopeful. Breonna and George Floyd have made us mindful. We must give while we live. It is not me, but we. It is not they, them, her, him, or the other. It is you, me, and each other. It is not the dollar amount. It is the algorithmic love response that counts. Give so that others may live. I am because you are. I am because we are. Ubuntu. Thank you.